Hadouken!
So you've seen the title, Final Fantasy 15 is coming out, so hey, why don't we just do a top 10 Final Fantasy game list, right? That won't go bad. So, 2 rules. 1, there can't be any like subsequent like series, like so let's say Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2, and there's no spin-off games, so there has to be Final Fantasy in the title. So no Kingdom Hearts, none of the Mana series, nothing but Final Fantasy. So yeah, let's get started.
Number 10. Final Fantasy. Kicking off the list, we have the game that started it all, Final Fantasy. Believe it or not, there was a time when Square wasn't the high and mighty company that it is today. After making some pretty lackluster games for the NES, Square was in a bit of financial trouble. They needed a hit, and so did Hironobu Sakaguchi. He was going to quit the entire video game industry if he couldn't come up with something, so he created what he thought was his last game, Final Fantasy. Like really, how funny is that? His last game, with the actual word final in the title. These jokes don't write themselves, people. While it's not anything to write home about these days, it was responsible for not only saving Square, but solidifying the JRPG formula that was set out by Dragon Quest. It's one of the most important games of the entire series, but compared to its brethren, it is leagues behind them. Number 9. Final Fantasy X. Now, Final Fantasy X was a huge benchmark for the series. It brought the series into the new generation of consoles on PS2, it had amazing graphics for the time, which was already a pretty big staple for Final Fantasy. And hell, a lot of people must have thought that if it got a remastered version on the PS4. Other than having pretty graphics though, it was your pretty typical run-of-the-mill Final Fantasy game. I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with this game being so low on the list, but honestly, I don't care. So many hallways, just ugh, so many. And don't get me started on the voice acting. But hey, at least it was the first in the series to actually have fully voiced characters. But there's no denying how important it was for the series, and how many childhoods it's influenced. Number 8. Final Fantasy VIII. So I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm not the biggest fan of Final Fantasy VIII, but when it comes down to the other choices, I still thought that 8 was better. Following the protagonist Squall, Leonhardt, and friends, they must fight against an evil sorceress, all the while falling in love? What really sets 8 apart though is its graphics and its battle system. The junctioning system allowed for different party members to tag team with different summons, which was really cool in concept, but it wasn't really executed that well. It was confusing and complicated and just, so many options. But the world is enthralling, fantastical, and has a great fan theory to boot. There's a lot of politics and plot twists involved, which keeps the story interesting, but for me, it's just a little too complicated than it should be. However, there's still plenty of lovable characters and locales to see, and if there's one thing that makes the game better for me, it's Triple Triad. I can't tell you how much time I spent playing that card game, so with that alone, it's definitely a Final Fantasy that's worth your time. Number 7. DISSIDIA 012, DUODECIM, Final Fantasy. Man, don't you just wish that Final Fantasy fights were just like, way more flashy? Oh wait, now they are! The Dissidia games are so freaking cool, but for the sake of content, I'm gonna put the sequel on the list. I mean, besides the obvious pleasing of Final Fantasy fans across the board with an all-star cast of fighters, it's just downright fun to play, especially for a mobile game. And while the game does have a story mode, you can kind of just play a couple fights without really investing that much time, which makes it great to play on the toilet, or in public. Come on, don't you lie to me about playing games and then pooper. Number 6. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Once upon a time in Sam's childhood, there was a magical game full of adventure. and jolly cooperation. That game was Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Crystal Chronicles is your basic action RPG, but with an amazing co-op experience. Not too many games use the Game Boy Advance connection cables to their full extent, but that was not the case with Crystal Chronicles. If you wanted to play multiplayer, you had to find the connector cords, tell your friends to bring over their GBAs, and bam! You were in for one of the best multiplayer experiences you've ever had. The actual base of the game is pretty typical dungeon crawling game, but bring a few friends along and it makes for a great time. The game itself has a great charm to it that can't really be rivaled by any other Final Fantasy game. The soundtrack, the aesthetic, it all just screams adventure, and there's no other way I'd have it.
Number 5.
Final Fantasy XII. Now, 12 isn't really a game that a lot of people talk about, but I don't really know why. It's a wonderful game, building off the combat from the fantastically popular MMO Final Fantasy XI. 12 took the concept and ran with it, and surprisingly, it worked out really well. It also took a page from Chrono Trigger and made it so that you can see enemies before encountering them. Not only was the battle system great, but Ivalice has never looked better than it did in 12. This game is absolutely gorgeous. Not only that, but the characters are some of the better in the series. For those of you who have played 12, you know who I'm talking about. Balthier and Fran, baby. Did you want some Han Solo and Chewbacca in your Final Fantasy? Cause here you go. Seriously, anything that Balthier says just reminds me of Han Solo. Hell, he's got his own airship, man. Man, Chewbacca got sexy.
Number 4.
Final Fantasy IV. Getting down to the nitty-gritty, we have one of my personal favorites, Final Fantasy IV. Right from the get-go, the plot takes a few dark turns, and that really pulled me into the game. Plus, it was really the first time seeing an RPG look so good. That's kind of a thing with Final Fantasy though, all the games just look so damn good for the time. While 4's battle system wasn't too crazy, the story was definitely the highlight of the game. It was truly a game where you had no idea what was going to happen next. Would your party betray you? Would the rest of your party make it out alive? Would you even make it to the end of the game alive? Nonetheless, Final Fantasy IV is easily one of the best stories told in the entire series, with some of the best characters to boot. And while the world of 4 has been expanded upon, it's best you stick to the original. However, the best way to play 4 by far is on the PSP. Trust me, you won't regret it.
Number 3.
Final Fantasy IX. And now we get to talk about one of the craziest Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy IX. There's no doubt about it. 9 is easily the most fun Final Fantasy in terms of theming and atmosphere. Set in the land of Ivalice, 9 follows a band of thieves as they plan to kidnap the Princess of Alexandria. Which turns out she wants to leave anyway, so, you know. Cool, man. So the adventure begins with a lighthearted and fun-filled sequence that has all sorts of shenanigans, and the fun of the game doesn't stop there. 9 was one of the first, if not the only JRPG to have an active time event. Or in other words, what was going on while you were fighting enemies and doing that one other thing, or playing Terramaster for hours on end. It gave the game a bigger sense of what was going on throughout the party, which in turn led to a lot of really rounded characters, which I'm a huge fan of. Plus, the game had tons of throwbacks to earlier games, and while that might just be nostalgia talking, I can assure you that the land of Ivalice has plenty of adventure awaiting for you in Final Fantasy IX.
Number 2.
Final Fantasy Tactics. Ugh, yes! I finally get to talk about this game. Totally didn't make this list just to gush about it. So some of you may not be aware of another series named Ogre Battle, which you should most definitely check out, but don't leave just yet, we have the video to finish. Well, the director of that series was like, hey, it's Square, you want to make a totally kick-ass game together? And just like that, oh my god. Dang girl, look at that Final Fantasy. But in all seriousness, Tactics isn't your typical Final Fantasy, but it most definitely deserves this spot. The politics of the story, and just the overall greatness of the combat makes this a Final Fantasy worth sinking your teeth into. Plus, if that wasn't enough, it takes place in Ivalice, which is the same setting as 9 and 12, which we just went over. And that's freaking cool, man. If you're a fan of any sort of strategy game, then you should definitely pick it up. And while it's great, it's still not quite enough to make number 1. So just what is the best Final Fantasy game? Well, before we find out, let's have a quick recap. At number 10, we have the original Final Fantasy. At number 9, we have Final Fantasy X. At number 8, it's Final Fantasy VIII. At number 7, Pleasing the Fanboys 101. At number 6 is the best local co-op multiplayer experience ever. Ugh. Number 5, Phantasy Star Wars. At number 4, Final Fantasy IV. At number 3 is Final Fantasy IX. And number 2, Final Fantasy Tactics.
Number 1.
Oh, man. Oh, you should see the look on your face right now. Oh, priceless.
Number 1.
Final Fantasy 6 and 7. Yeah, that's right. Final Fantasy 6 and 7 make it to the top of the list. Why, you ask? Because this is my list, damn it. Jokes aside, 6 and 7 are basically the same game. Don't believe me? Well, let's take a look at the evidence. So let's take a look at the villains. Kefka is a clown hell-bent on becoming a god and ruling the world. And Sephiroth? Well, he's not so different besides maybe the lack of face paint. And along with that, death and rebirth have prominent themes throughout both of these games. Through the characters, through the world, it goes on, trust me. Both of these games have optional party members amongst them. Not only that, but they have entire backstories to them as well. Magicite and Materia are basically the same system, but with different summoning attacks. The music is absolutely amazing. Nobuo Uematsu is a frickin' genius. Plus, both of these games have so many great moments between the two that I really can't put one above the other. The opera scene, the motorcycle chase out of Midgar, riding around in airships in both games, the similarities are almost endless. And I know that a lot of you are probably already typing out comments about how much of a cop-out this is, but before you do, just take the time to appreciate the series and how highly regarded both of these games are. They are without a doubt two of the best games ever created, and what more can I say about that? Don't agree with me? Well, that's understandable. Be sure to sound off in the comments and tell me what your favorite Final Fantasy game is. And while you're at it, why not subscribe and follow me on social media stuff? I'm a person too, you know. Alright, well, I will see you guys in the next one. Later.